Bien. Buenos días a todas.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else present here today. It's quite a pleasure for me to see you all here today. Welcome all of you, boys, girls, adolescents, young people joining us here today, and everyone else joining us via the FAO social media outlets. I would also like to welcome the UN authorities who have been quite positive partners making this event possible. So first of all, I would like to invite you today to the Regional Youth Forum of Latin America and the Caribbean. This is part of the official mechanism of girls, boys, adolescents, and young people, which is part of the country forum. And we are here today to have an impact on public policy applicable to boys, girls, adolescents, and youth. I would also like to mention that we have World Vision protection officers here as well. Their goal is to ensure the informed, protected, safe participation of boys, girls, youth, and adolescents. Maria Zúñiga from World Vision from MMLLAC. Please raise your hands. There we have you over there. And then I would also like to introduce you to Mercedes Radios for MMLLAC and the Millennials Movement LAC. And they're here to protect, as again, they are protection officers. Allow me to provide or introduce you to representative of Boys, Girls, Youth group, Maria Zucusqua from the Norte Grande Corporation. She will provide us with some welcoming remarks. Distinguished representatives of the various UN agencies, of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and other UN agencies, authorities present, and of course, my dear boys, girls, adolescents, and young people present. My name is Maria Luis Sosca. I am the focal point of the Boys, Girls, Adolescents, and Young People's Group for Latin America, which is a civil society organization. I am also here on behalf of the area in charge of studies and development for the Norte Grande organization. And this is the second time we're holding this event in person. I would like to extend a special appreciation and recognition to all of you, the boys, girls, young people, and adolescents who are present here today. And the rest of you who are joining us via streaming, thank you for being here, because without you, this event would not have been possible. Now, we are seeing each other face to face after many difficult years, a few difficult years related to the pandemic and other difficulties. We have, despite these, maintained a very resilient position and unified position. And above all, we are here to make sure that no one is left behind. Now, once we have surpassed the challenges that face our region and face our ability to exercise our human rights, the rights of the youngest people, still, beside that, we are here today. We've overcome these challenges, and we are here to mobilize our region and turn it into something to change it. I come from a very faraway country, but despite that, I am here in this region that is receiving me. So I see you seated out there today, and I recall the first in-person event we had 4 years ago at ECLAC, and I am very proud that we are here, that despite the pandemic, we were able to maintain this critical perspective and critical approach from our own corners of the world to build new processes and have new partners to try to continue progressing toward meeting the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. Now, without a doubt, we are here. We need your support to meet our common goals and to have regional perspectives and visions of boys, girls, teens, and young people to make progress with the 2030 agenda so that we can share these initiatives with ECLAC and the 2030 Latin American Caribbean Forum for Sustainable Development to be held this week. Since the very early process of involvement back
de niños, niñas, adolescentes y juventudes, vimos a más de 500 niños, niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes
in
involucrados
December, individual involved ranging from ages 7 to 30 and coming from 20 different countries throughout the region. These participants belong to different groups such as LGBTQ, Afro-descendants, indigenous, rural, young people, immigrants, HIV positive individuals, and others. And we are here not just to culminate this process, but we are here to ensure that we are able to raise our recommendations and position ourselves with regard to the 2030 Agenda monitoring activities. I also would like to thank all of you for your enormous efforts and FAO for the significant initiatives as well. Thank you for your initiatives. Mr. Garcia has been very helpful since the very beginning. I would also like to thank the National Institute for Youth, the association, the Scouts Association of Chile, the planning body as well, and other partners who have made this event possible. Without further ado, and with a great deal of enthusiasm, I would like to officially launch this event, the 2030 Forum of Boys, Girls, Adolescents, and Young People of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you. And I would also like to invite you to share the hashtag Juventudes ALC 2030 and Youth 2030 so that you can join us from your social media outlet. Now I would like to introduce you to Mario Lubetkin, the Assistant Director General and Regional Representative for Latin America and the Caribbean of FAO. Go ahead. Thank you for your support.
Excellent. Buenos días.
Good morning, dear young people, dear friend Maria Sutkowska, and other friends and colleagues here, and others joining us virtually. Dear friends from the UN family who have also come from far and wide to share in this event. It's an honor for me to welcome you to the Forum of Boys, Girls, Adolescents, Young People of Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, this is an extraordinary opportunity to have direct dialogue with you, and of course, primarily to listen to you, to listen to your concerns and the issues that you would like to address so that we can reinforce these issues with regard to the 2030 agenda. Now, data speak very clearly and show that 20% of the Latin American population corresponds to young people. And in a very changing context with significant global challenges, this group, you have been able to position yourselves as key players in this transformative process. We are aware of the fact that many of you continue to live in a context of extreme violence, poverty, discrimination, and social exclusion. Lack of access to education, lack of jobs, and lack of other opportunities and hurdles must be resolved because this is a very serious issue for our present and future. We must mention as well that the youth voice must be heard, and we must encourage and allow for them to be involved in decision-making processes. This implies that together we should be able to support your leadership endeavors and support you as agents of change that you are. Now, this generation of young people has suffered the impacts of a variety of successive crises that have an impact on the social inclusion and development processes, such as conflict, problems such as COVID, forced migration, hunger, and persistent inequalities. And even perhaps one could say that you are the first generation to live on a planet that is extremely affected by climate change. So we have the obligation, and we are fully committed to supporting young people to make sure that their demands and contributions are visible so that together we can come up with strategies for better and more opportunities, starting from inclusion and taking advantage of new technologies and opportunities related to research as well that the current context provides. Now, there are programs and projects with governments and policies, and these enable us to build greater capacity to improve our production systems so that they can truly be more resilient, more efficient, more sustainable, but above all, so that they are more inclusive. And that is one of the most considerable challenges. In this regard, I would like to call your attention to the role of rural young people. We consider them to be key components in the development of their livelihoods, specifically those who uphold our food systems, food and agricultural systems. Now, there, unfortunately, we have a great deal of social exclusion. There are accesses with regard to access to jobs and digital tools and technology that many of us elsewhere have. Now, we are working closely with rural youth to encourage transformation of the agri-food systems, starting with decent juvenile labor and work and fostering greater technological access. There are several initiatives. One is called 1,000 Digital Villages, which aims to boost access to digital tools for entrepreneurial activities by young people. Now, for FAO, it has been quite an honor and a moment of quite a great deal of joy and happiness to host you here in our home. And we would like to commend the other UN agencies for this interagency decision, especially ECLAC and others, to allow, to open our doors to the young people, to foster the development of many. Now, I would like to commend the group of boys, girls, adolescents, and young people of the civil society participation mechanism of Latin America and the Caribbean. I would like to commend you for your activities. This is the key young people's coordinating mechanism. As Maria was mentioning, they play a key role. And I would also like to mention that you are very important to all of the UN agencies involved in this process. I am very pleased to actually be able to launch this event because it is you, the young people, who actually will be launching a week's worth of activities where we will be addressing development activities. And again, tomorrow, we will be meeting here today to address all of the progresses related to agri-food systems and how these are interweaved with other SDGs such as poverty, health, water, inequality, and others. And soon, on Wednesday, in fact, we will reconvene to continue working under the leadership of ECLAC for the rest of the week to address other considerable challenges and issues related to the present and the future. So over the throughout the week, we will continue to address aspects that you are launching today during your dialogue session.
¿Tendrá un impacto positivo o negativo para las futuras generaciones, para ustedes? Es nuestro compromiso continuar trabajando juntos por un mundo más inclusivo, más estable, más pacífico en donde no existan personas que viven en situaciones de hambre o pobreza. Los plazos.
Everything that we do 30 is one affected by hunger or poverty. We see that the term is running out, the term to meet the 2030 goals defined in 2015. But we cannot do this alone. None of us can do this alone. It's a significant challenge, and this is the responsibility of a wealth of various stakeholders, but specifically the young people, because you aren't the key players today, but tomorrow, and then years in the future. So again, I just wanted to reinforce our ongoing support for this process. This is a process to build and to secure that you will have the future you deserve. I am sure that given your passion and energy, given your determination and perseverance, you will have a significant impact to build a better life for you and for everyone following suit. So once again, thank you and the best of luck in your endeavors, and we are here to provide you with support.
Okay, now we will have a presentation of the process and methodology. We have as a group of children and youth with a recount of the processes in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as some of the results. So we will be reviewing today and throughout the rest of the meetings. We will now introduce Maria Gabriela ECOSOC dos Santos, who's a working group of society from Brazil. Hello, good morning. I will be greeting you in Portuguese. I'm from Brazil. She's now speaking in Portuguese. Let me introduce the involvement process of youth and children engagement. So the work started with the developing of 3 tools: the virtual consultation, reports for the regional dialogues that we were conducting. So the idea is that through these tools, children and youth should see the difficulties, the challenges, and actions through the group at the regional level, so that we can bring them to the 2030 support. They were all written in Portuguese, English, and Spanish, so as to allow for the engagement of the group. And so we had a webinar to explain what were the tools and how the engagement processes, and 3 training processes on SDGs: 6, 7, and 9, 11, and 17. And we had the support from certain organizations, such as Global Author Partnership, UNICEF, the Network for Youth for Water in Central America, ECLAC, universities from San Francisco Xavier, the Organization of American States, UNDP, Encajamundo, and Techo para mi país. So we collected all the ideas, recommendations from the youth, which will be the political charter as a result of this engagement. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay, now let me introduce Racha Richards. She's the national delegate from the Commonwealth of Youth of Pennsylvania, from Miami, that will present the processes from the Caribbean. So, Tacho.
Morning, everyone. Allow me to speak to you in English this morning as I present to you on the processes in the Caribbean. Discussions and consultations are always ongoing in the Caribbean. We're always trying to engage Caribbean young people and the Caribbean youth. Our preparatory process included 2 days of great discussions with the young people, and it highlighted the voice of young people, their ideas, and as well as the recommendations. We placed an emphasis on SDGs 6, 7, 9, and 11, and identified key ways that young people can play a part in solving these problems that we face, specifically the problems that affect young people. During the process, we utilized 2 platforms, Zoom as well as Twitter, to try and make the process as accessible as possible, as we know we can find a lot of young people on social media. And so during this process, we engage persons from the Commonwealth Youth Council, which I'm a part of, as well as the Caribbean Regional Youth Council, a lot of national youth councils, as well as individual young people throughout the Caribbean. We had support from ACLAC, their office in Trinidad, and we are appreciative of their support. So we discussed a lot of the key issues such as clean water and how a lot of the rural areas or rural parts of the Caribbean still don't have access to clean water, which has been exacerbated through climate change or because of climate change. And so we engaged on those platforms. We looked at the issues of infrastructure and infrastructure development and how young people are not sufficiently engaged to be able to bring their innovative ideas to the forefront, as well as access funding to try and improve the infrastructure. So the consultation process, as I said, went over a period of 2 days, and we had persons from the French, Spanish, as well as Dutch-speaking Caribbean. We had translations. We also conducted polls to try and get directly from young people and engage directly with the young people. We tried to get the opinions from as much young people as possible. And so we're happy to be here, and we look forward for fruitful discussion and putting more emphasis on some of the issues and recommendations that we have coming from the Caribbean. Thank you.
Very well. After the next presentation, we will have the picture. So I will ask for your best picture face. So let me introduce now Juan Pablo Poli, focal point of the Children and Youth Group and advisor of International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Latin American, the Caribbean office, presenting on the methodology. So Juan Pablo. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today, both in person and online. Let me just emphasize how excited we are here to be here and see the realization of so many months of work. So the methodology for today and how we're going to work. Like Bruno said, now we will have the official picture, and then after the picture, we will have the first panel for today. This is an intergenerational panel with 5 expert youth in the 5 SDGs under review this year. There will be a dialogue with representatives from different UN agencies, like ECLAC, the resident coordinator for United Nations in Chile, the regional representative of FAO, the regional director of UNDP, the regional director of United Nations Forum for Development, chaired by Rosario Díaz Garavito. from our planning group. At 11:30, we will have a first coffee break, and then after the break, we will have a plenary session on the SDGs under review. We will have experts, again, from different agencies such as FAO, UNICEF, the regional coordinator for the UN, for the UN program for the environment, and specialists from the environment and sustainable development from the UNDP. These will be like the first portion of the working session of today, per se. First, have a presentation and a brief context on each one of the SDGs. And then we will have these working groups that Bruno will explain how we're going to break into groups, how the groups will be signed. You will have color stickers and things. And then we will have 1 hour for this first portion of breakout groups, lunch at 1:25, and then after lunch back to the breakout groups to finalize the discussions. And the focus in the second portion will be trying to agree on the main conclusions and recommendations from the groups on each one of the SDGs. You will have intergroups draft report we produced intergroup with all the processes and inputs from the various dialogues and consultations throughout these last few months. And based on these documents, you can make your inputs and recommendations based on these draft. After this second half of working groups at 3:15, we'll have an interactive plenary session on SDG 17. The breakout groups will be on SDGs 6, 7, 9, and 11, and 17 will be worked as a plenary because it cuts across all the objectives. This segment is to be interactive, dynamic. We will have Raquel Santoja Garcia, Patricia Orman as chairpersons, and this will be short yet dynamic, so that you can try to reach agreements, reach consensus on a quick and dynamic basis. Then we'll have a second coffee break, and before closing at 5 p.m., we'll introduce the recommendations from these working groups and these discussion groups. And at 5:25, we will have the representative from ECLAC, a representative from Argentina, from the Instituto Nacional de la Juventud here in Chile, and the assistant researchers on democratic governance from UNDP. This will be the last plenary session with the presentation of recommendations and replies from these people. And then at 6 p.m., we'll have the closing remarks from Christy Wong. She's a representative of our group. So this is like a general overview of the program and the interaction dynamics for today. If you have questions, please approach us. And I wish you all a fruitful day. Enjoy it. And this is just the first step. First step for a work of cooperation and unity among the youth organizations. So thank you very much.
Very well. Let us now adjourn for the group photograph, and then we will meet here again. So please let us all get up
and look nice for the picture.
También les comento que acá, desde la FAO tenemos estos cubitos.
At FAO, we also have these cubes. Please take a picture of these. Here we have SDG 6, clean water. We can have 2 rows, please. We have the SDG 13. ¿Alguien está por ahí? Tito.
No, está bien. Sí, ahí ya se acomodaron. Está bien, entraron todos. Al menos con mis lentes. No sé si le alcanzo el lente. ¿Puedes bajar un poco? Tú. Sí, bajar. No. Hola, hola. Chicos, les pido que los cubos traten de no tapar a...
I ask that you be careful so as not to prevent the fellow colleagues who are in the back with the cubes. So please be careful with the cubes.
Eso, perfecto. Ahora vamos, atentos todos acá, por favor. Eso es.
Mantenga la sonrisa.
Smile.
Miren a todas las cámaras, son varias. Everyone keep smiling. Watch all the cameras, please.
Y ahora un video saludando ahí.
No.
Súper, muchas gracias.
Thank you, everyone.
Vamos tomando asiento.
Let's be seated. We must follow the instructions. You may take other pictures with the SDG cubes during coffee break.
Vamos tomando asiento. Eso, tomando asiento. Nos saludamos en el coffee break.
Please be seated.
Sí. Bien. A continuación,
Very well. We continue now with the intergenerational panel. Here we'll have a conversation between young people from Latin America and the Caribbean and U.S. representatives, all having to do with the 5P, persons, people, prosperity, peace, and partnership, the peace involved. We will talk a little more about this and the 2030 agenda for boys and girls, adolescents, and young people from Latin America and the Caribbean. Very well. We have a few guests for this panel. Rosario, please go ahead. Good morning. I bid you welcome. Welcome, bem-vindos. We're very happy to have you all here with us. We will also have English speakers in this session. So for those of you who need interpretation, please fetch your earphones. We will also have some virtual conversation. Now, this will be an interactive segment. It's really a dialogue. It's like on TV. We have often an agenda, but many things can happen. Now, before I continue with this segment, I'd like to invite a very special person, Mr. Jose Manuel Salazar Irinach, Executive Secretary of ECLAC. And he is our counterpart of this
para el involucramiento de niñas, niños, adolescentes y juventudes en el marco de la revisión y seguimiento
process for the agencies for the people Caribbean. He has been accompanying us and supporting us in this process. You have the floor, sir. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this event. I'd like to greet the General Director and representative for FAO in the region, Mr. Mario Lubet King, and our host, also the resident coordinator, Ms. Maria Jose Torres Macho, the dear regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean of UNDP, Michelle Mouchet. I don't see her, but she's on the way. We have worked closely as the chairs of the collaboration platform of UN systems. I also greet the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Population Funds for UN, Ms. Susan Sotoli. Dear young people for the region, good morning. It's an honor for me to have been invited to bring you the opening remarks on this intergenerational dialogue during the Forum of Youth for Latin America and the Caribbean. We are delighted to have you here in Santiago. The best way, I think, to initiate this forum for Latin America and the Caribbean on Sustainable Development 2033 is in such an event as this one of young people who are interacting and hearing with their voices and perspectives and telling us what is essential both for the present and the future of the region. I agree that the mechanisms of civil society, especially young movements, have an essential role in order to set up the agenda that will be debated between Latin American Caribbean countries in order to give a form to decisions that will certainly affect our region and our planet. Welcome, Michelle. Nice to see you. I have heard that this was a long process that started in November 23, and during this week in the ECOSOC Youth Forum. And I'd like to congratulate you for your devotion for a more fair, a more just future. Now, I am sure that here we will see an assessment of what has been happening. And we're about halfway through the whole picture. And I will later on bring you in a report in Wednesday on how we are at the middle of the request, but not on the middle of the road. But we still have much to do on this path. Through this forum, you will have a reflection on the future of cooperation to identify shared ideas, innovative ideas to come far in reaching the SDGs. These kinds of dialogues are very important to bring in shared responsibility and encouraging social participation and more inclusive, sustainable results for all. Dear young people, I'd like to say that your perspectives, innovative ideas, and your passion for change are an inspiration and essential piece in trying to have a better future for the future. At ECLAC, we promise to work together with you. And I'm sure that the same goes for all from UN systems. I think this is an opportunity to hear about your ideas, perspectives, learning from your experiences in working together to bring in more productive, inclusive, and sustainable ideas. We must recognize that the challenges we're facing are complex, and they're all interconnected. And this idea of interdependency has changed throughout the world. As you know, that in the 90s, we had a process whereby intergeneration was celebrated. But now, we have had so many changes in the supply chains, and now we talk about energy security, food security, and others. So right now, this is all part of what we have to manage in the multilateral system, how to bring in confidence again in the system in looking at the interdependence between countries. And if sometimes we get the wrong path and we lose all of this. But this is of great concern, and I will have to pay attention to what's been happening. And also, we have tremendous economic costs.
Donde puedan compartir sus experiencias e ideas y donde puedan cuestionar el status quo, por supuesto de manera constructiva, importante, en aras de un mundo mejor. Necesitamos su energía, creatividad y visión para crear un futuro más próspero para nuestra región y para el mundo. Y para terminar, les deseo un debate muy productivo, estoy seguro que va a ser muy inspirador. Confío en que juntos podamos crear un futuro mejor para nosotros y para todas las generaciones venideras. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, señor
We thank José Manuel Salazar and the Executive Secretary of ECLAC for these initial words on this intergenerational dialogue. And in order to make the space a little bit more dynamic, we would like to invite the different young people that will accompany us to be part of this discussion. We invite, first of all, Rashai Reshi from the Commonwealth Youth Council of Bahamas to accompany us at the frontier. Thank you very much, Rashad. And likewise, we invite Christy Wambach Maravilla, a focal point, a global contact point in the regional organization. We also invite Axel Martinez Nieto from the Global Water Partnership in Central America. We also invite Rosemary Ramit from Guyana. She is from the Council of Organizations and Persons with Disability of the Council of Disabled Persons in Guyana. Likewise, we would also have the virtual participation of Hollandness, who accompany us from different latitudes, such as Rachin Smith from Canada. Likewise, we once again invite the Executive Secretary of ECLAC to accompany us in the front here. Thank you very much.
Listo. Entonces, como les decía, todo esto es una logística interesante. Ahora les vamos a explicar.
Now, would like to explain to you the dynamics of this process. We will be holding a very interesting discussion with the young people that accompany us from different organizations and countries, and also with the Executive Secretary of ECLAC, and we hope that you may also share your comments with us about these contributions and what the representative of the youth will say. But we will also have a hot chair game, a disruptive space where we will invite different representatives of regional UN agencies so that they can come to the podium and also deliver or share their comments within the framework of this discussion. And this is an intergenerational dialogue, and therefore we want to listen to each other. So, thus, we can now begin with this dialogue. What we will do is that we will invite, first of all, one of the youth that have been doing marvelous things as from the Caribbean. And in fact, we want to know of their process, because let us remember, Latin America is not only Latin America, it is Latin America and the Caribbean. So I would like to present Rashad Rishi. So please, Rashad, you come from the Caribbean, and you have been undertaking a consultation process with young people. What were the main issues that young people in the Caribbean have wanted to place on the agenda?
The Caribbean is home to 11 million young people, ages 15 to 29. And what we did was we engaged them over a 2-day process via Zoom as well as Twitter. We wanted to hear directly from the young people. We wanted them to feel in charge of the space. And so we met them where they were. And we also included experts, young experts who are in the field, who are in the industry, to share their experiences and some of the challenges that they are currently facing. So we did that, and then we came up with an outcome document that laid out exactly what are the challenges as well as some of the recommendations that came directly from the mouths of young people. Some of the key issues that were brought forth include, of course, access to clean water. We see where a lot of rural areas in the Caribbean still lack access to clean water because of the lack of infrastructure that's available. So because of the urbanization of a lot of the city areas and central areas, oftentimes the rural areas and indigenous communities are forgotten and left out. And so that's one of the key things. We cannot expect persons living in those communities to simply move out because that's where they're from, that's their sense of belonging. But a lot of times they're expected to just move into the more developed and urbanized areas, but we cannot forget them. And so we really do need to improve the infrastructure, to improve the access to clean water. One of the things that we learned in the Caribbean from COVID-19 was that because of the lack of access to clean water, we had a lot of sanitation and health issues. And so that exacerbated the issue of access to clean water. One of the other issues that we see coming out of the Caribbean is that young people do not feel engaged. They don't feel engaged by regional partners. They don't feel engaged by a lot of the organizations that are making the decisions on their behalf, decisions that will affect them. And so what we see a need to be more disruptive, to change the way we teach young people about the SDGs. We need to incorporate them more into our learning systems and our learning mechanisms so that they know what they are, as well as so that they're able to be more innovative in coming up with some of the solutions that can be implemented. So we see that there needs to be more engagement with young people, especially university students who are engaging in research, who are coming up with innovative ideas. And we see where there's a need as well for funding of those ideas that can very well be some of the solutions that we need to combat some of our most challenging issues.
Muchísimas gracias, Rashard. Thank you very much for sharing with us. Christy, cuéntanos, tú estás en la región de América.
Christy, you are in the Latin American and Caribbean region. What do you feel the process is like in our region? Hi. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be able to share with you a little bit more about the process of involvement of boys, girls, teenagers, and youth. This, in fact, has been a long-winded process. We have spent months working hard, and we began as from December with a virtual consultation that was available in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and Portuguese. The idea of the group is to be able to have these spaces and provide tools for the greater involvement of youth. And we hope that the language barrier in our region will not be a breaking point in terms of what we can do with children and with young people. And as mentioned by Maria at the beginning, what has been very important for us is the participation of more than 500 boys, girls, teenagers and youth aged from 7 to 35 years of age in many countries in our region. In addition to this virtual consultation, we also held an information session because we're interested in more youth and more organizations that work with young people can have this possibility of getting to know the capability of exerting influence that they may have through forums such as the country forums and the youth forum of ECOSOC. In accordance with our calculations, around 50% of children and youth that were involved in this process were not aware of the country forum, and around 70% were unaware of the youth forum of ECOSOC. Therefore, it has been very encouraging for us to know that more children and more young people are involved in this major process. In addition to the information session, we also held training sessions with experts adults. We were supported by various agencies such as UNICEF, UNDP, ECLAC, and many others. The idea is to build on top of what children and youth have been doing. We have also conducted a regional virtual consultation process because we know that there are barriers for young people and for children to gain access to these spaces. It's difficult to mobilize because much of our work is based on the volunteers. We also have this instance of the face-to-face forum, and we adapt to the hybrid formula that exists today, and that's we are transmitting, we are streaming this, and it gives us great pleasure to be able to share this. This process has gone hand in hand with different agencies such as UNDP, FAO, ECLAC, that have all supported us during this 4-month process, and we're very happy because this is indeed what we need: alliances, multi-sectorial, multicultural work, intergenerational work in order to achieve more participative processes so that children and young people may indeed be where decisions are made. Thank you very much. Let's give her a warm hand. This is a way in which this has to be dynamic because sometimes, because we must participate, all of us. We have worked hard, but also how we can continue to move ahead. It's also important to mention that the group of boys, girls, teenagers and young people have been mandated by ECLAC in order to promote and facilitate the participation of boys, girls, teenagers and young people in the region in monitoring the 2030 agenda. And that is tremendously important because we have that in Latin America and the Caribbean. But what is even more important is that we are the region, and the only region in the world that has inserted this regional mechanism within the global mechanism of children and young people. And that means that we can come from territories and reach the regional forum or the ECOSOC Youth Forum or the high-level political forum, bearing the voices of boys, girls and young people, taking their voices so that we can reach and mobilize the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. We're talking of a regional discussion. However, we also have to locate to place this discussion in territorial terms. So I would like to highlight Maria Jose Torres, a resident of the UN system in Chile, so that she can talk to us about answering the following question: how the offices of the resident coordinators of the UN in the region can help us to catalyze this discussion and put these recommendations so that boys, girls and young people and teenagers are making, and turn that into a national policy. So we invite her to make use of the floor and so that she can take part in the hot seats of this discussion. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I greet, of course, our hosts, Mr. Salazar, Jose Manuel, a great pleasure, Mario from the FAO, my regional colleagues, and the colleagues from UNDP, Michelle, and others who are working here and participating in this forum. And of course, a warm welcome from Chile to all the boys, girls, teenagers, and young people who are participating, and also our panelists. I believe that this effort to focus discussions is a key aspect. We either do that in the countries where we work. It's very difficult to see that it is not easy to reach international fora. So thinking about what the colleagues that have already spoken said, the idea is to see how we articulate these innovation spaces. What are we doing differently as from Chile in order to better listen to young persons and teenagers? And I believe that here in Chile we have something which is very spectacular. There are two SDG advocates at an international level, and you probably know them. One is Isidora Guzman, who is possibly the youngest. I believe she is indeed the youngest one. She is 18 at present, and apart from being young, a young talented woman, she is a young woman that is disabled, and so she plays the double role of making youth visible and also disability visible. And the other advocate also advocates in favor of women. So these are young Chilean women that form part of that platform that we need to amplify, and I congratulate the forum because that's the idea.
I think there's something else that's very important that has been a topic of conversation among our principals. Amina Mohammed is arriving in Chile on Wednesday and said that the UN belongs to the young people, and that's why they are going to do what they're going to do. And this is a challenge for all of us because, as mentioned by the moderator, this is intergenerational dialogue. We are the UN, but you are the UN at the same time. So it's important for us to rise to this challenge, the intergenerational challenge. And as far as Chile is concerned, we actually sat down to listen to the young people linked through the ECOE group, the COP26 group, and there's more than 200 young people who organized their own activities to define the main issues affecting young people. There was an issue with regard to access in the Caribbean, health related to the environment, and there's a long list of topics related to which the young people took part in COP26. And then there was an interesting experience related to the International Women's Day, where there's an international panel with women and young people to discuss important issues such as digital access. And then how, thanks to the work carried out by UN agencies, boys, girls, and adolescents actually took part in defining the policy, which in the end fed the overall outcomes. So it's important for you to have a microphone available to you. You are agents of change, and it's important for your opinion to really have an impact with regard to issues that are so important, such as the environment, participation of women, and the digital issues. So again, there's another issue that we are addressing here in Chile. We're very proud of this as a country. We are working on building this new framework for cooperation. And what happened was there's actually a consultation, obviously with the government of Chile, with which we signed the framework. But it was important for us to reach academia and civil society as well, to reach those organizations that traditionally represent those who are left behind. And we had a special meeting with young people who also took part in this civil society consultation process, and they are becoming a benchmark group. So the Chilean framework of cooperation has a key benchmark group of individuals, and the young people are involved in that. And what's most exciting is that we are working with the government of Chile to prepare the SDG Acceleration Summit that will be held this year. And there's a strategy that we have not yet been able to convey, but we're still working on this. But one of the groups of young people to sit down will be a group to address innovation. And this SDG Acceleration Group. So thank you. And I would now like to give the floor to someone else.
Vamos a poner esto en media luna.
I'm going to put this.
Nos mencionaban, ¿verdad? Tenemos procesos tan importantes.
Different formation. So we also have many processes that are very important, such as the SDG Summit that is slated for September of this year. But then Mohima Mohammed's words related to the UN Charter are key. And the first statement is, we the people. the first phrase. And young people are part of that group. We're part of the people. So in keeping with the UN essence of this participatory process, now we will hear from one of the most important aspects related to the SDG agenda, which is this triple planetary crisis. So allow us to invite to Axel Martinez Nieto from the Regional Technical Assistant. He's a Regional Technical Assistant for the Global Water Partnership from Central America. Could you talk about one of the most complex issues that we have with regard to the SDG, with regard to the planet and those challenges? Could you address that? We have this triple planetary crisis. This is the first generation that has to address this, and we don't really know what's going to happen. And one of the challenges, how to accelerate investments related to mitigation and adaptation, but especially focused on the rural sector. Young people, boys and girls, have identified that what they need is to be better prepared with regard to adaptation and mitigation in the rural area, because this does not just affect infrastructure, but other areas. So we need to invest in them. That's very important. Climate change is also very important. There's an emblematic movement in that regard with regard to policy. And another challenge there is to institutionalize the participation of young people, boys and girls, beyond what we've already mentioned. We know that the typical NGOs are included, international ones, but they're already part of this process. So we need the participation to be institutionalized, for example, by way of a delegation that will be negotiating, that's already included in this negotiation process, to include in an institutional aspect of the participation of young people, boys, girls, etc. So that's another key issue that has been identified. And there's something else that's particularly interesting, particularly bearing in mind that we're young people. There is a lack of continuity at times with regard to policies. The administration changes and the focus, the approach of policies change. Maybe the entire policy, entire policies will be changed, or the approach will change. So that makes it very difficult for us as well as young people to continue with either a professional or educational path forward. So that's important. And then with regard to my SDG 6, water, we share many of the challenges that the Caribbean has. I am from Central America, and sanitation is a very major issue for rural communities. But let's go beyond that. Let's think bigger, better. I think the pandemic made it very clear that there are gaps, not just between the rural and the urban settings, but within the urban setting or peri-urban settings, where we have many settlements. I think they call them shanty towns or camps here in Chile, where people do not have proper drinking water or sanitation services. So that is a very considerable challenge as well. It's not just about providing them with a faucet, but we want to make sure that they have continuous services over time, 24/7, for example. In my city, we have an 8-hour per day service, particularly during the dry season. But we want to make sure that we can go beyond the faucet per se and think about continuity of services in the future. When we think about water, we tend to think about sanitation, but human consumption needs to be a priority, of course. But we also need to change our approach to have a integrated resource management. And we have identified a significant challenge in that regard. There's another interesting area, and that is that young people are already working on these aspects from a variety of different corners, from within academia, from within activism. And it's important to protect activists out there. We have instruments to do so. For example, the ESCOSOC agreement, which is key. It's also important to encourage and foster ratification among the countries that have committed to these agreements. Thank you, Axel. You also referred to the issue of environmental activists in Latin America and the Caribbean. We do not have the best track record. We are the most dangerous region in the world for environmental activists. And we do not necessarily have data available with regard to young people, boys, girls, young people, and adolescents who are activists, but those who are actually living in households of activists. So that's yet another issue that, and it links us. It's a segue to the next presentation, which is related to the water crisis. Now, this was a very unique year after practically 50 years of the water conference that held with the first water conference for our generation of the UN, and this is a crisis that we are going to experience. We are experiencing, but we will continue to experience. So, in that regard, allow me to invite someone quite interesting from an agency that has always had its doors open to us, and we are very appreciative. I would like to invite Mario Lubetkin, the regional representative for Latin America and the Caribbean Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. He has opened the doors to his home to us and says that we are part of his family. So I would like you to again come up to the hot seat, to the podium, to answer a question. How will the water crisis, what will be the impact of the water crisis, and how will this exacerbate the food crisis that will continue to affect us in the upcoming years? Thank you for the question, and thank you for everything you're doing for this debate-like discussion. I was talking to my colleague from the UNFPA, and those of us who are here representing the UN, ECLAC, myself, UNDP, UNFP, UN Environmental Program, UN EP, we have not been here for all that long. We're relatively new in our positions, and we're very busy. We need to make lots of decisions, and we don't always have the time to listen, but I think this is the best way for you to help us with the messages that you're conveying. Your message, for example, you were just referring to the question you would like me to help you answer. I say help because you often have more answers than I do. So first of all, water. Is obviously extremely important. We all know that. There's no doubt about that. And water plays a key role in humanity, and we're not going to harp on that issue because it would just be repeating something we all know. So let me focus on three aspects. First of all, with regard to FAO's responsibility and how water is tied to the food issue, which is one of the key issues. I know that ECLAC is also organizing certain events to address the water crisis as well. But allow me to begin with this concept. When we talk about food security, we know that water is a key element therein. Food security is based on four key pillars: availability, stability, access, and nutritional consumption. Those are the international agreements with regard to the pillars that we need to focus on with regard to food and water. And so when we talk about any of the topics related to food security, there's a crisscross with water, whether we want to admit this or not, or whether we want to avoid it or not. We simply cannot. So when we say, okay, there are 820 million individuals in the world suffering from hunger. We know this grew during the COVID sector by 46 million. Even though the word water does not appear, we know that water is one of the factors that truly has an impact on this situation. And in Latin America, 56 million people suffer from hunger, and prior to COVID, it was less, and over the 3 years, 13 million people have been added to these ranks, unfortunately.
But not just as a need. When we talk and we put together nutrition, water, and food safety, I mean, water plays a huge role in terms of nutrition. I have a couple of notes here which are really important. Agriculture, as we all know, depends on water, and it accounts for 72% of world extraction of fresh water, and this is 95% of developed countries. These are net numbers. There will be no food security unless we manage sustainability for water. And this situation, food production, which has increased by 50% since 2012, means at least 35% more fresh water. We think of 35% more fresh water. And that means that we will have to feed 8 billion people in the world today with less water, with greater resource pressure, and of course what you've mentioned, which is a climate change situation such as the one we're living today. And that means we need more capabilities and responsibility to better integrate challenges on food and nutrition. So I guess we all know what the diagnosis is. The challenge is what type of solutions. I believe there are many. It's not a silver bullet. Using this concept, continuity and consistency, two magic words which are necessary to use. And from these notes on these proposals that we are discussing, one has to do with the loss and vulnerability due to droughts, floods, and other natural resources, which is necessary part of the analysis when managing water. Yet another aspect is how do we develop and implement innovation. Everyone has made reference to the different agencies are working on finding those digital tools, in our case for farmers, to improve efficiency with less. Thank you. Thank you, Mario. He's the regional coordinator of FAO, working with us today. He was discussing really interesting topics. We were talking about people, but also intergenerational approach, meaning that not only youth and children, but everyone. And this is important to work, as you said, we have to work in an articulated manner so that to have even future generations. We're now talking about future generations in the United Nations. We have the Future Summit next year in New York. And the consultations are being made so as to how we can protect the generations which are not here today. So that this is an intergenerational work, has to include and involve everyone. But also, you refer to an interesting topic, namely people, how this water crisis has a direct influence, a direct impact on a food crisis. But these, at the end of the day, will affect people from our region, Brazilian people. We are here trying to do multiple things to move forward given the challenges we face every day. Thus, I'm really pleased to have one of the members in this intergenerational conversation, Rosemary Romititi from Guyana. She's from the board of people with disabilities in her country. Rosemary, as a woman, as a young woman with a disability, tell us, how do you face these consultations in this process? What are the challenges as far as people are concerned, that children and youth in the region we face, so that nobody is left behind? What are these challenges? I mean, trying to organize my question a little better. What are these challenges that today are leaving people, youth, children left behind? Rosemary, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rosario. And to answer your question, so really, it's when you think of the question you're asking me, what we have to think about is the inequalities that people in general face. So when we look at the SDGs on the review, we have to come back to people, because people are the ones playing the role, and they're in the forefront of all of this, more so young people. But the challenge now comes in where we not only have the exclusion of young people, or we don't have the meaningful inclusion of young people, but then young people come from diverse backgrounds. They have intersecting identities. And so we have young Indigenous people, young people with disabilities, who are, for the most part, excluded from these processes, excluded from these consultations. And so what you'll find is that young people with disabilities, young Indigenous people, are not empowered, they're not educated, and so they are not afforded a space in which they can be able to bring their perspective. I come from both identities. I am a young woman with a disability, and I'm also Indigenous. And so coming from that background, it really, it creates this barrier for me, because not only do I have an inability to access information, access the environment, access, the consultations and processes and all of these things, but then there's also my Indigenous identity, in which in my country, the Indigenous peoples are seen as uncivilized and uneducated, so really it is the matter of the inequalities that are present, and really how do we overcome these challenges, and how do we create that space in which young people who are excluded can now be included. And I mean, this is a really good example, but later on, I'll definitely talk about and give recommendations of ways in which we can ensure that people, including people from minority groups and marginalized communities, are included in spaces such as these. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Rosemary.
Thank you, Rosemary, and thank you actually for being here. I mean, it's been amazing trying to organize among ourselves and being here from different sub-regions of our beloved Latin America and the Caribbean. We've discussed about people and sustainable development, yet those spaces where there is no peace, there is no room for development, and this is something we have to bear in mind. In a region such as ours, affected by different political, social, environmental crises, sometimes says, okay, we're going from one crisis to the next. Okay, let me now have our Raheem Smith from Grenada. He's virtually with us. We didn't want to leave behind the youth from other places not being able to attend today. So we have Raheem. Raheem, from your point of view as a young person, considering the consultations from the group. We have Raheem. Raheem is on the screen right now. There he is. Okay, there you are, Raheem. We have you now. Welcome, Raheem. Nice to be with you. Raheem, tell us a little bit from your point of view as a young person, considering the consultations completed, the group of children and youth group. What are the triggers that leading us to this challenging situation in the region from this point of view of the younger generations? Remember that without peace, there is no room for development. Raheem, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Clear and sound and clear, yes.
Sorry, I'm not hearing. I'm just making sure you're hearing me.
I don't know if you can see us, but we can hear you.
Okay, great. So good morning to my fellow youth from Latin America and the Caribbean. Though I cannot join you physically, I'm very happy to join you virtually. Thank you very much for that question. Now, peace and the attainment of peace is an important factor for the achievement of the SDGs. A peaceful society can contribute to growth and prosperity. There is no one cause to crimes and other forms of violence that we face as a Caribbean community. In the region, we face a lot of crime, and oftentimes we see young people involved in such acts of violence. Now, in answering this question, it is important to recognize that young people are a vulnerable demographic, and often in getting involved, they are not aware of the consequences, which I believe it is important to highlight. The lack of education on these issues is causing our youth to not be fully aware and knowledgeable to make the right choices that they make. Another cause for the violence and crime, we see that the youth are mentally frustrated. In many cases, there is no one to turn to support them or trust. And as a result, we see that they choose crime as a way to survive in cases of committing theft and robbery. In association to this illegal use, there is illegal use of guns in the islands, which has heightened the conflicts in the region. The heads of governments of CARICOM recently met at a symposium in Trinidad and Tobago. And from this discussion, it was said that violence is a threat to public health. And the heads of government discussed conventional ways that CARICOM can take in tackling this issue. Now, another issue that I would like to speak about in regards to, in relation to peace, is in the context of climate change. As a region, we are very, very, very vulnerable to climate change. Every year, we see major storms affecting our people and our economies. In 2017, Hurricane Maria Hurricane Maria hit the island of Dominica, and in order to build back, it costed them 3.5 billion. Now note the figures, 3.5 billion Eastern Caribbean dollars. Now, we know what the causes of climate change is. It is known everywhere. The inaction of polluting countries is one of the causes. Well, primarily the major causes. And if this inaction continues, the devastation of our region will continue to happen, and it will continue to cause the destruction of our economies and chaos among our people.
Muchísimas gracias, Rahim, por tu intervención y gracias por acompañarnos.
Thank you very much, Maheen, for your interpretation, and thank you for being here with us in spite of being so far away. And now we are facing a very difficult complex, climate change and the others, and we young people face so many issues, transitions between governments, and when we lead this to political levels, it gets complicated. It's very interesting for me now, having heard about the context, to invite our following guest for the podium. I invite Ms. Michelle Mouched, who's a regional director of UN Program for Development, and she will be answering this very difficult question. How can we get full development for all people in the region, considering that we are a very complex region? Thank you so much, Rosario, and thank you for moderating this discussion so well. Dear youngsters who are here with us, Maria Jose, dear Maria Jose, Mario, thank you for hosting this meeting. We're extremely comfortable. Thank you. Hello, Susana, and dear Jose Manuel. For me, opening this very important week on the Youth Forum for Latin America and the Caribbean with this conversation and dialogue, it's a very powerful way, very inspired way to begin, so that we know that through our voices and these discussions, the exchange between young people from different countries will ensure that we will take these voices over there. And this confirms the importance of this group of boys, girls, adolescents, and youths as part of the mechanism to involve civil society, as well as the importance of these contributions on preparation for the sixth forum that will start this week. And this is also important for the preparation of the ECOSOC Youth Forum that Rosario has already mentioned. These contributions are very valuable. As of UNEP, the youths, young people, adolescents are all key players towards development. They are subjects of development. They are active players in order to go forward towards a sustainable development system in the region. Only recently, on the last report on human development, we have identified clearly how governance is an enabler towards sustainable development, and also to ensure better conditions for the participation of our youth in decision making. And this report on human development refers governance as an enabler, and that talks about different pillars that must be met in order to truly ensure that we may meet this sustainable development. We're talking about systemic thought, transparency, inclusion, and subsidiary systems. In talking about youth, through the strengthening of the youth institutionality is one of those mechanisms to make sure that we may be at the service of that population and strengthening institutions so that youth may become a full player, as the previous speaker said, in order to build peaceful societies and to leverage development. And strengthening institutionality and youth has to do with development of regulatory and legal frameworks so that their rights are ensured. And also in the development of programs and public policies that are aligned with the demands of young people. And here it's basic to ensure dialogues such as these, where your demands may be heard, connected, and we as UN agency may then ensure that we will support the country so that this communication may come between the decision maker and youth. And there we see a third point that is important in talking about governance, and that is how to foster the creation of official youth organisms. And this follows what you have said, continuity through governments. And there we must ensure that there are formal spaces and not ad hoc spaces where the youth may really impact decision making in public policy, in the decision making, and so that your voices may be heard. And now, with my hat of public policy maker, let me tell you that it's important that you be a part of decision making in developing tools to measure poverty amongst the youth and adolescents. Doing this with the participation of young people, and I can say firsthand that about the value and the wealth that we find in your own ideas, perspectives that are different and supplementary, and that, as you well said, Rosario, getting connected with all of these different perspectives. And that is why I praise the value of this dialogue, this intergenerational dialogue. I talked to Mario and I was not sure whether the youngsters would be here and we would be elsewhere, but I don't know, whatever way we're doing it, the experience is so important. They're hearing voices from different subregionals and from some regions. And that's so important to have a different vision of development in the region. And Mario, this all has to do with partnerships. One of the objectives of sustainable development is being revised in this process, and that is SDG 17. And that's the big enabler in order to go forward into the agenda. And here the partnerships start at home by ourselves as agents, and Jose Manuel and I, as co-vice chair of this regional platform for cooperation, repeat our willingness to foster this work between agencies in order to tackle the problems that the youth face, and also that their voices may be heard with a multidimensional, comprehensive standpoint. And in finishing off, there's much to be done. This kind of space and the constellation of this space is very important, and they're going in the right direction. You and I was saying that the region is working in times of great uncertainty, and this brings in fear and uncertainty, and it increases the polarity that we're facing in the region. There is information that often brings social division, and there's a demand for more collective action to strengthen our democracy. In this exercise, in tackling these three big barriers to sustainable development, the participation of youth is important today. Mario and Maria Jose have said that indeed there's a future perspective, but we have an urgent present. You have much to contribute to this. And there, I repeat, the full disposal of UN programs and divisions to support the integration and full participation of young people as key players towards sustainable development in the region. Thank you, Rosario. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I have been moved. And indeed, this is not a process that is completely new, no. Many of the regional directors and the persons who are here with us have been adding to this space. This is something that started 1 month, 3 months ago. But no, this started in 2018. And here there's Carlos, a young people who's now working at UNDP. Adrian from Argentina, he has been with us. Maria Sucosta over there. In 2018, the young people took up the space at the regional forum, and we said, what about the young people? We will create a room for them. So then in 19, we created this, and from then on, even though we faced the global pandemia, political transitions, coup d'etats, we have also faced many social and economic challenges and a tremendous climate crisis. But here, in spite of all of that, we are here. This is a long-term process that makes us confirm what you said. The decisions we must take today with the young people, and this would ensure our adult life that will be a decent life. Now, this is the first part of our panel to give a context on what's happening, and we are moved. But let us now take a look at what's coming later on. And here I invite Axel to be here. We need a prosperous society. So how can we leave this in order to reach prosperity as a region? What are the recommendations from young people in the region to come to that future with a full, sustained, prosperous life? Thank you. Well, I think talking about prosperity in such unsafe times is difficult. And precisely, we've been working on that. We've been working with looking for the North, and how can we have a more active participation with institution that is continuous but truly effective. That is important. As young people, we must ensure that future, but that means we have to start right now. And we will then continue with the support. Many of you surely work at local levels. I will bring you an example because we talk about inequality. I recall a meme, and this is a humorous one, saying that our generation is the first one that did not get to reach the cheap land. So we as Latin Americans, Central Americans can talk about prosperity with that idea. It's a region with so much migration. And here I will bring you a concept that was used in the Caribbean, the 4 Cs: communication, collaboration, cohesion, and community, all geared towards community. I work on the field and in the office, talking about development and one of the things that we say is leaving no one behind. And to do that, we must realize that the work should give a chance to that. And how do the young people do it? With young entrepreneurship, with the volunteer work. And this is something that can be done in Latin America. And that's where we will start.
Thank you very much, Axel. This has been wonderful, and the hope. We are one of the most mega diverse regions in the world. We also have, well, we're the most resilient region, and We even say that resilience is something that can even be in our DNA, just so that you bear this in mind. Yes, we are very resilient, and that is one of the characteristics of the young generation present here. You also talked about what young people do, how we return this hope to them, and how we go back to this process. And I would like to ask Rosemary to say to us, okay, we have to advance in this sustainable development agenda. What is the role played by young boys, girls, teenagers and young people? And what are the actions that we're undertaking, implying the actions that we're undertaking in different territories and different spaces?
So I know I talked about the challenges and so on earlier. Now, I'm asked to talk about the role. For me, the role that young people and children, adolescents, etc., has to play is they bring perspective and they bring capacity. So Axel has been talking about young people now being the first generation to acquire certain environmental and social problems. They bring that perspective because they are the ones with the lived experiences. They know what is going on, they know what they need, and they also know how to find the solution to that need. So we first have to understand that young people and children bring their perspective and they bring their capacity because they do have the capacity. They are able to be part of decision making and be part of the solution. And I want to give you some examples of how this has actually translated into concrete actions in my country. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Spotlight Initiative, which is a UN project. And so through the Spotlight Initiative, that is geared towards ending family violence in the Caribbean. You heard from Rahim about how crime is high and violence is high in the Caribbean. And so through that project, my organization has been able to work and empower 300 young women and girls with disabilities on the various legislations regarding gender-based violence. And we are working to create a space where there are survivor advocates so that those young women and girls will be able to support each other and support other women who have experienced gender-based violence. It also includes making legislations in a format that is accessible in audio, braille, sign language, easy to read format for those with intellectual disabilities. And the UN system in Guyana, I must say that I think it sets a great example for other agencies around the world to show that when you include people with disabilities, when you open doors and give them opportunities to be able to conduct consultations, you find a way to work and create stronger allies with marginalized groups, especially young people. And that was done through the Office of the Resident Coordinator, in which my organization was able to conduct consultations with the various UN entities in Guyana, and we were able to assess where they were on the disability inclusion strategy as they were working towards the SDGs. And so we were able to work along with our resident coordinator, and she has been a champion for us, helping to achieve the indicators of the accountability scorecard. And when we talk about governance and having young people included in political processes and decision making, we have a project with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in which they are working across Guyana, empowering young people to be decision makers, to be change makers, to be able to work within their communities. And this is done through empowering them on civic education, having them involved in meetings with the Elections Commission to ensure that elections are accessible and that our indigenous peoples, our indigenous young people are involved in community actions where they are given small grants to be able to make a change, so make an impact. If they need a pump in their community so that they can get water, if their schools need computer or an IT hub so that they'll be able to access information, these are the opportunities. And now is the time in Guyana, where you see young people at the forefront more than ever before. And it is all because that space and that opportunity was given to them. And so I'm saying that if this can be done throughout different UN systems across the world, you'll find that young people do have a role to play, and we all will benefit from that role. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rosemary. And actually, perdón, y en realidad hablábamos de cuál es
And we were talking about this role, and Rosemary, that is an example not only with through this Spotlight initiative in her country, but it's also an example of these alliances that we have generated. We met her having breakfast in Costa Rica a month ago, and suddenly Rosemary started to tell us that she was transforming her community as a young disabled woman so that her community could be much more accessible. And we said, this young person has to be in this place. And how can we establish a partnership with her and find her? And then thanks to the UN Women Office in Guyana, we were able to bring her to this event. But that is not the only example. For this forum, we have done this from the beginning in terms of how we establish these intergenerational alliances and young people in this process. How can we do this work? This whole process is a clear example of the role that the boys, girls, and young people in the region are taking in order to push forward this sustainable development agenda. In this sense, now that we're within the framework of these reflections in terms of what is upcoming and what is it that we must do, I would like to offer the floor to Rashad Richie. And Rashad, in this context, what is it that we must do, or what are the following steps or the recommendations on the part of young people to face up to the triple planetary crisis? How can we guide ourselves in these actions in order to respond to that?
So in response to the crisis that we currently face, we see where, of course, we do need to engage our young people. It was very interesting to hear about the various spaces that have been created. And it was very interesting because that's one of the things that we have been trying to focus in the Caribbean, not just creating the space, but creating meaningful spaces for young people to engage in and to voice their ideas and have those ideas heard and respected as well as implemented. And so we've been at the regional level trying to do this through legislation, where youth organizations are legislated and mandated by law, so that it's not just something that's ad hoc or something that is from time to time, but it's something that is mandated and consistent and allows young people to engage. And so I think that that is critical. Another thing that I think is critical to resolving the issue is involving young persons at the university level in research and innovation. Many of our greatest achievements as humankind and as people have come out of university institutions. And I think that there's not sufficient funding within our universities in Latin America and the Caribbean to support young people in discovering their ideas and having those ideas backed by funding for research, and those ideas to be implemented to resolve some of our issues. This includes using reverse osmosis technology to improve access to clean water. I'm trying to improve our infrastructure for getting water to our rural areas. I think that young people also need to be more engaged with the SDGs so that they know what part they can play in their daily lives, whether it be reducing water consumption to promote conservation of water. I think that is also very critical. And so as long as we continue to engage young people in a meaningful way, I think that we'll be well on our way in trying to achieve the SDGs. I think that another thing we've been looking at in terms of creating a more inclusive environment and more inclusive cities has to do with the lack of planning in a lot of urban areas. And so young people need to be included as well in trying to plan urban areas where young persons with disabilities, persons from rural communities and indigenous communities are included in that process. Because in fact, a lot of cities are planned without young people in mind. And if young people are going to be the ones who are here well into the future, then young people need to be included now. It was very interesting to hear when we were talking about food security. There's no food security without water security. There's no water security without proper infrastructure. And I dare say that none of this can be possible without young people. And so we need to include young people in these processes. We can't continue business as usual, or we can continue to operate in ways in which we are comfortable. Unprecedented challenges that we are facing cause for unprecedented action. And we need to take that, and we need to take it in concert and in collaboration with young people and the various youth agencies that exist.
Gracias, Rashid. Y ya vamos llegando a cerrar.
Thank you, Rashid. And we're about to close this very interesting discussion. Christy, this is a key year, not only for boys, girls, teenagers, and young people, but key to the whole community. We have the SDG Summit in September. We have consultations, of course, also for the World Digital Agreement, which is the first regulatory framework from the UN to protect our digital rights. We are also on the way to the Summit of the Future next year. What are the recommendations so that young persons can be part of this process, and also within the framework of the review of the 2030 agenda? How can we ensure their participation? What is it that is being sought as from boys, girls, teenagers, and young people in the region? Thank you, Rosario. Well, first of all, I believe that it is important to acknowledge children and young people as people that are the subjects of right, and not only beneficiaries of public policies, but also as actors and actresses in order to co-create allies and in order to promote the advance of the 2030 agenda. We must go beyond being simply tokens when we work with without romanticizing the participation of children and young people in different spaces. And that has to provide us with frameworks for the safe participation of boys and girls and young people in decision-making. As was already mentioned by many of our colleagues, children and young people have worked on a voluntary basis, and therefore we need for our partners to have capacity-building processes that enable us to enhance the work that we have been doing. What is also very important is the mobilization of resources so that we can create spaces so that we can be a part of them, but also to obtain data related to age groups. So we need to have information, to have data about children and young people in Latin America and the Caribbean, so that we can indeed face up to the challenges that we find in our different territories. Likewise, we have to be clear on the fact that we must achieve decentralized participation. We cannot be left simply with the participation of young people and children in cities. We want more children, more young people from rural areas, from peasant areas, from indigenous areas, may be able to participate in different processes. The idea is to have multicultural, intersectional, intergenerational processes with a gender perspective. Likewise, we cannot forget that we are participating as young people in this process, but also children. We can never forget, because that is an important point. They are the next young people, so to speak, and they will have to determine how to contribute to resolve some of these problems that we're facing as a result of climate change. Likewise, we must acknowledge the actions, as mentioned by Rashad, spaces that are mandated, that are not simply ad hoc, that are not simply temporary moments, and also involvement processes that are not only conventional. Why not try to achieve involvement through art, through the intervention of public spaces in different ways that also respect the freedom of expression of children children and young people. What is also important is to have transparency mechanisms that are friendly and accessible so that the young children and young people may be able to participate in accountability processes and in terms of citizens' oversight. We need to create awareness among with our counterparts, civil servants, decision makers, and the different entities, so that they can acknowledge that we can co-create and co-work. And what was mentioned by our colleagues is, which economists, in my case, I'm an economist, which some people call the four aspects: the work of government, civil society, academia, and organizations. And for that, we need very important allies such as the FAO, ECLAC, UNDP, UNFPA, the different agencies, so that we can reach the different spaces, but also within the civil society itself, so that there may not only be adult-centered spaces.
I think that's important for concrete action, not just for moving forward with regard to the 2030 agenda, but also with the Water Action Agenda, the ESCOSOC Agreement, and many other processes. Thank you. Thank you, Christy. Very interesting to hear how we shouldn't romanticize our participation. We're very happy to be here, but at the same time, we see powerful youth representatives, and the young people, the children and boys who will be representing us at the side events, thanks to the World Vision team, who's been with us since the beginning, and the J and ILAC is very important. So thank you, Christy. Now, in that regard, and talking about how we can get better organized, I would like to invite the last
A Susana Sotoli, que es directora regional para América Latina y el Caribe.
podium. Susana Sotoli, the regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean, the co-chair of the Youth Working Group
Bienvenida.
of RCP LAC from UNDP. And Susana will be answering an interesting question. Now, as co-chair of the Interagency Working Group, how can we ensure resources are mobilized? We've talked about everything, now let's talk about resources. How can we ensure resources are mobilized so that young people can continue participating and can continue consolidating these involvement opportunities, all for the benefit of the 2030 agenda? Thank you, Rocio. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been listening quite closely to this very inspirational conversation. Warm special greetings to both sides of this intergenerational equation, the young people and, of course, my colleagues from the UN family. And I am very pleased to be here because, on a personal note, I have to admit that I have been working with boys, girls, adolescents, and young people for many years now, from within UNICEF and now from within the Environment Program. And you know that the UNEP has UNDP rather, has children at the heart of its mandate. And this could be interpreted in different ways, but with regard to some of your own indications, I think it's important for us at the UNDP, it's key for us at the UNDP to have these spaces and opportunities, but not just for dialogue, but also for generating activities, actions that can actually translate into dialogue and concrete initiatives. And that, in keeping with what Rosemary was saying, is really about having young people's opinions, learning what these are, and solutions. We can fill the table with the ideas, but when you ask me with regard to resources, I think it's important to really understand what it means to invest in young people. Let me begin by saying that in this region we have more than 160 million young people aged 10 to 24 ages. And one out of every individuals is either a young person or an adolescent in this region. And this means that most of the countries in this region are still addressing this demographic boom. That means that there's a certain percentage of the working population that is greater than those who are not working. Now, this is an opportunity. We know that all population processes are constantly changing, and the dynamic for the future is population growth. What does this actually mean? Well, when we say investing in young people in a sustainable fashion, this involves mobilizing resources for isolated projects here and there, or UN projects that could or could not be sustainability. It's more than that. We are talking about how it's a priority to invest in boys, girls, adolescents, and young people in terms of distributing a country's wealth. And in that regard, we're working with you, because when I speak here, I'm speaking on behalf of the UNDP as a co-chair of the regional mechanism of young people from within the UN. And on a personal note, of course. And it's important to have specific justification for each party that we are trying to convince, so that we can ensure that investments are more efficient, effective, and equitable. And each time we step outside, we have to have a new strategy, a specific strategy. And we've been working on that. Now, the first justification is the one I just gave you. It's the populational growth, demographic justification. And in that regard, it's important to have information to better understand that who we're dealing with, where they're all located, and how diverse the group of boys, girls, adolescents, and young people are. And in that regard, the regional group has conducted 2 youth surveys to better understand how COVID-19 has affected this population group, because the pandemic has truly interrupted educational pathways, job opportunities, and the losses in this region are truly comparable to other regions. Therefore, information and data, disaggregated data, make these various groups more individual, and they speak more to who these young people and teenagers who are excluded, who they really are. And we know that advocacy truly needs to be evidence-based. That's another justification. And there's another justification still, and that's the rights-based justification. This is not an empty rhetoric. This is about working with the countries, with the member states, the UN member states, with a view to supporting them and sometimes requiring them to be accountable in terms of their human rights-related international commitments, specifically in the context of boys, girls, young people, and adolescents. Now, this is an ongoing effort. This is something that really should begin with the knowledge and information we have related to the sundry mechanisms in existence that, when addressed in the field and from a national perspective, can be quite powerful. But we do not always have the right audience. For example, here we have an economist here. Sometimes we are dealing with ministries of the economy, Ministry of Finance, but they're not always going to be convinced with demographic and rights-based justifications. Therefore, one needs to have a financial justification referring to the costs of a country not investing in this demographic boom or bonus, I guess one could say. And for example, how much does it cost a country to deal with or to address teenage pregnancy? And what is the return on the investment the dollar investment spent by country in early childhood investment. We know that that has a multiplying effect. We think that in this regard, we have truly pulled together many different agencies. We worked closely with you as well on building this solid information base. I do think we need to do much more, though, in that area, because particularly in a crisis context with a tighter financial belts and many different agencies competing for a budget, we need to have solid arguments and justifications that will further encourage the decision makers to decide to invest in this or another priority. And in the end, there's this political justification as well that really needs to be present. And here I'm referring to how someone talked about effective participation. Now, the political justification and political in terms of politics, and you, young people, have truly grown your effective participation, and you can have an impact through your vote, but through other participatory opportunities. You can have an impact on an organization, institution, or a policy or political organization. And I'm telling you this because you are, well, even though you are experts, but I'm mentioning this because science has shown that it's very important to ensure that young people, boys, girls, actually participate in areas where you are involved. In other words, to create participation projects that are not sustainable over time or that will not have an impact sounds lovely and it's a photo opportunity, but they're not examples of effective participation. So it's important to understand where those opportunities lie. For example, family, the hearth, schools, universities, where we have student associations and where, historically speaking, student organizations have really changed the course of university actions, and also in youth organizations where it's also important, and at the UN. Let's not forget the UN, because as Maria Jose said, we're all members of the United Nations, but we need to have the voice of young people within the UN. It's a participatory opportunity, and that's why I love to hear from you. And as you were saying, a lot of you are quite powerful and you have your own realms of participation, and the UNDP, as well as the overall UN family, has a mandate. We have a mandate. And it's also very inspirational and gratifying to learn together alongside each other. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Susana. She's the regional director or UNFAP, and thank you for your encouraging words. I mean, we will be closing this interesting discussion with all these recommendations and commitments, but also we have the last input from Rahim. This is an interesting year because we have the SDGs summit, as we said before. What are the commitments we need from the states from this region in order to guarantee the well-being of the youth, children and youth in our region?
Thank you very much for that question. First of all, in answering that question, let me say that as children and youth, we are very frustrated. It is true. We are frustrated by the lack of progress and constant blah blah, as Greta Thunberg would say, from our governments. We have 7 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And according to the UNFCCC's Executive Secretary, Simon Steele, as he stated in one of his speeches, that is 2 Olympic years away. 2 Olympic years away. So it's not far. Now, with our current slow progress, the goals are nowhere to be achieved in 2030. Nowhere. Now, as young people, we first and foremost would like to see our governments commit to their commitments that are being made that are being made on the SDGs. Since 2015, the governments of the world have adopted the 17 development goals unanimously. 8 years later, there has been no significant progress. This year, the UN is having the SDG Summit and also launching its second global report on the progress of the SDGs. We must use this summit to accelerate progress on the SDGs if we would like to meet the 2030 target. Now, secondly, in working on achieving the targets of the SDGs, children and youth are asking that governments remember that projects and policies should not be top-down, but rather bottom-up in their approach, as these will affect the communities that are meant to support. As such, collaboration with the communities are very important. A community-driven process will make it fit for purpose for implementation, as the needs of the communities are different. Thirdly, the youth are also calling on governments to put us as children and youth at the heart of the goals. We often hear the cliche that youth are the future, but we are not only the future, we are also the present as well. Engaging youth in participatory processes of decision-making and consultation for policies is very important. Youth are not only activists, we are also experts in many areas. We are also researchers, and we bring strong views and realistic and actionable views to the table. It is also important to note that as youth, we will continue to remain frustrated, but we are also passionate and we are also hopeful for progress on a better world. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Rahim. Muchísimas gracias por estas.
Thank you, Rahim. Thank you for these recommendations in September, the SDGs Summit. We need that space, like Rahim said, in order to strengthen the commitments and start to move towards the SDGs. We'll be adjourning this intergenerational space. Mr. Salazar, it has been a really interesting conversation. We have shared context, solutions, a hot chair with the different UN agencies. What are your thoughts about this, and how can we move on from ECLAC? What are the points of view in order to take the next steps to make sure that youth and children are part of achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development? Well, thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege listening here. I'm full of energy now, and I'm full of passion and commitment with your thoughts. Lots has been done, and some of you have put it greatly in each one of the topics. In terms of the topics, the processes, I believe there are several things here which are important, say, around certain keywords. I was listening to complexity, the word complexity, and it is true, complexity and uncertainty. Not all the uncertainty is due to complexity. Some uncertainty is because of the black swans, things we don't know, and complexity in itself generates uncertainty because of all the different trends we come across. Technology, there are several technology revolutions at the same time, and the convergence of these revolutions is that surprises us with very positive things, but also with certain risks, as in many other fields. So I believe that here it is important to think, which is the dialogue, your participation, your engagement is a must. This is not as a favor. This is not as a political engagement, which is also part of it, but the way to manage democracy, the way to manage societies successfully requires the engagement and involvement of every sector. There's a book of an author here called Daniel Ineraditi. He's from Spain, the Basque country. Several interesting books. One of them is Towards a Theory of a Complex Democracy. One of his theses is that we are living in a complex, challenging world. Democracies are now more complex and challenging. And the answer is just more complexity, meaning that it requires what you just referred to. It requires all that distributed shared intelligence with education. New generations have this huge ability you have with this training, views, and commitment. All that distributed intelligence is to be activated at all levels, territories, at the local level, a global agenda, the national level. That's the only way we can move ahead, by managing in democracy those challenges we have been discussing and which are involved in the 2030 agenda. And even after that, 2030 is just around the corner. We have to start thinking 2030 it's like a mid or short term. Long term is 2040 and 2050. So there's a thing there, complexity. The other key word you refer to is inequality. Latin America and the Caribbean, this inequality, it's poverty but inequality at the same time. Not the same thing. We're working on it from ECLAC, but these tends to disintegrate the social pacts and this creates divisions. So we have seen that. So this thing, this is one of the things you mentioned, but there is another thing, which is prosperity, thriving. This was referred to several times. Prosperity, thriving requires more work. We are working on it from ECLAC. Just to give you something, we all know that the economy has been deaccelerated, this crisis cascade, as we call it in the UN. We grew less in 22 compared to 2021, and we're growing less in 2023 than in 2022. But if you look at over the long term, Latin America and the Caribbean has a severe problem of mediocre growth. We did the numbers. I will submitting this in the document. If you figure out the average growth rate for the whole region since 2014 to 2023, this year will be 1.2. The average growth rate in this decade for the whole region is 0.9%. In the lost decade, the average growth rate was 2%. So this is not only a lost decade in terms of growth. So, this is economies are obsessed with growth. Well, that's a growth with characteristics we all know. Growth is more sustainable, it's more inclusive, but it's growth. And many what we want to do as countries, as SDGs, as a system, circular economy, e-mobility, energy transition, all those types of things require growth. Growth is just a different growth, respecting the planet, ideally a circular growth, but we require growth and greater growth, different to the previous growth. We have all discussion of better measuring well-being, not only GDP. But let me insist, without greater growth, where do we get those quality jobs we need? That the growth will generate the new jobs, and these new jobs will come from e-mobility, circular economy, science, technology, innovation, as you refer to. So we will not be able to reduce poverty. The funding to reduce poverty. Poverty is reduced two ways: mobility of the labor market, which depends on education, and so on and on and on. This is not the distortion as an economist, but we do need a much greater growth rate, especially for developing countries, a growth with certain characteristics in order to reduce poverty, informality, creating job opportunities, quality jobs, and more importantly, in order to fiscally fund the different programs. Not everything comes from loans, not everything comes from reducing debt. I mean, that's also important, but some will come from tax collection that as a society, we all need to fund in a social pact. But again, with greater growth, tax revenues are greater. So I had these couple of ideas. We also talked about peace and insecurity. It's nice. It's nice to hear from you that we can. I mean, root cause of migration has to do with insecurity, and that this is huge structural problem, lack of justice, a human drama, and this violence, crime. As a good news you give us from some countries, just in Guyana and other countries with those spaces, because this is some kind of a cancer, right? Once spread, it's really difficult to address it. And last but not least, how you talk, we are emphasizing in ECLAC and the United Nations that here this is not just the what, lots of dreams, inspirations, proposal, but the how. How do we move towards that? This is the key conversation we'll be having this week as far in terms of the SDGs. How do we speed up, knowing that in some fields, the crisis and shocks have affected us. And part of the answer to the house is governance, institutional quality, and again, management of this complex process. So I'm sure my colleagues from the UN colleagues are very pleased with this dynamic, intense. Congratulations, Rosati. Wonderful chairing. And we are fully convinced in the United Nations that the road ahead is having you involved. I mean, we talked about spaces, and it was you. It's not just ad hoc spaces, but we need to empower them. We need a mandate, such as the case in UN at the national level, the different countries at all levels, because this is a collective action issue. This is not magical leadership solving problems. This is a collective action of an educated citizenship. And I'm very pleased because a huge problem in that complexity is social media. Social media will not be the way to discuss as we are doing here, seriously, in person. I mean, it could be in writing, but in 140 characters, in very short message, we cannot understand an educated citizenship on these topics. And this is part of the problem we are experiencing. Thank you very much, and congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Salazar. It's been an excellent discussion. This is the end of the conversation. This has been really interesting to listen to your thoughts. We have to measure ourselves. We have to measure this progress. We have to address the multidimensional things. Human rights are really important because the right to participation is a human right, but the right to development is also a human right. And the youth need the necessary spaces to exert our human rights and those rights to be respected. Besides that, we hope this will be this is the starting of the path. We started a long time ago, but we are growing, and we want to have you, ECLAC, the youth, and the children today, the different organizations, the different agencies, so that this forum is just a starting point to continue to consolidate the engagement of the youth. Let's be part of the official spaces, the official fora, Thank you for that recognition to this 5-year effort together with you and the different agencies. And also, we hope that all these messages will be translated through you, through the youth here, with the decision, local, the national decision makers, through ECLAC and the other agencies, with the governments and states next week, and that these will allow for all these recommendations arising from today can be translated into our lives so that we can take it to the forum of the youth of Fora, that Maria will be here to help the group and other youth, but also in the political high level forum. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, chairing this opportunity. Has been great, very challenging, but I'm pleased. But this work we have been doing for so many years is realizing these achievements, the ability to congregate and mobilize, and to turning these
están respetados y nuestro futuro asegurado. Muchísimas gracias.
rights are being respected.
Algo que es importante también mencionar para las personas.
Something that must be informed right now for those who are in streaming. With this, we conclude the transmission of the first part of the morning. We'll connect again at 5 p.m. with all of those who will join us in streaming for the closing remarks. And we also invite the speakers and UN representatives for the final, for photographs.